Alright, YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 134, Magic in Defense of Nationalism. I previously spoke about the concept that there's a little bit of a difference between two basic styles of magic, two categories as you could loosely term them. The globalism and nationalism in the political and social sense extends to the spiritual realm of mankind. All of man's endeavors, all of his thoughts, his systems that he creates are combined and subjugated to his biology. That is, they evolve in an extension of biology. They change over time in response to stimuli. There's competition between them. Humans are ambitious. This ambition is projected on those systems. I'm actually writing, I've already written the notes up. I'm going to write a new work that extends this even to extraterrestrial cultures and makes evolutionary statements on them. I'm actively writing it right now. I just got done with another booklet. There will be two more this month as well. But Magic in Defense of Nationalism is the concept that globalism itself is a bad thing. I think a lot of people have established that it's not really working. We see that the rudiments of it, in a strictly political sense, no religion aside, we can observe it when we look at the EU. It's not working. When we look at attempts to unionize different states around the world, things are in constant squabbles, if not outright fighting. It just doesn't really work. Different groups of people that have diverged tend not to get along when they're forced together and homogenized. They can work together as long as they remain separate, otherwise it doesn't work so well. I would say the same about magic. If we were to globalize magic, we would end up with homogeneous swill. That is, things would be very, very boring. They would be very, very prescribed, and they wouldn't do anything because they wouldn't psychologically coincide with individuals. The psychology of a population tends to follow patterns. Now, individual psychology is also very important. There will always be people who are different within a population, but because they are raised up under more similar circumstances than they would be among outside groups, because there are inherent differences between the upbringing, the enculturated values between these groups. Their language in many cases informs their view of reality, and especially their spiritual system, even the food that they eat through epigenetics. Because of these differences, folk spiritual systems also have diverged over time. Now you see, cosmopolitan magic is a very good thing in the world. I'm not talking about multicultural, sort of, globalized, homogenized. So cosmopolitan is in adopting outside magical systems, figures, rites and rituals, objects, and so forth, adapting them, making them part of your own, literally appropriating them into one's own magical culture, so to speak. That's a good thing. We see this with the Petit Albert. We see this with some of these bric-a-brac, as they're sometimes termed, style grimoires, even from centuries ago. We certainly see it in the Creole style of magical systems that we get in the Americas. We've seen this before in history. We can even go back to antiquity and we can find the Romans, famously, they adapted rituals, rites, gods, and so forth from outside the core of Rome, what had originally been Rome in the Italian peninsula. They're there, they have their pantheon. What they did is they appropriated foreign gods, likened them to their own pantheon, said, oh, well, Jupiter is kind of this folk deity, this totemic figure that we just heard about in Thrace is kind of like Jupiter, so it's actually Jupiter. We'll build a temple, and we'll bring images of their gods here, and we'll venerate them, and we'll build them a temple, and they can have, this god of theirs, because we support it. It happens to be like ours, and this is further proof, by the way, of our religion, because other people discovered the same pantheon, haha, and they looked for the synchronicity between these deities. Cosmopolitan magic is a good thing. The fact that we can use especially the internet to access virtually any occult book that's ever been made, it can be edited and re-released in an accessible physical form. It can be put online in many cases for free in an electronic form. They can be derived from, people can study them, people can analyze things themselves, they can think about these occult systems. They can do the same with religious texts from antiquity all the way through modernity. They can study archaeology, which is very much paired with spiritual development in every possible way. They can analyze these things, they can learn about them. It's extremely important. It's a very good thing for the world. Homogenizing them, though, or trying to render morality as a veneer over the spiritual, to say that there are certain systems that shouldn't be studied because they're evil or they're eugenic or politically correct, or, oh, this is too fluff bunny, this is too liberal or something like Wicca, I think is wrong. People should study all of these systems. They should open their mind to new possibilities, not just sit in their occult echo chamber. I've met people. They follow some occult path, and to the exclusion of all others. And I think that's sad, because they're limiting what they can read, they're limiting what they can study. They could get a new view that maybe they'd agree with even more, that would make sense of some of the mysteries they've thought about over time. And in many cases, they don't do that. I think that's rather sad. But nationalistic magic, not forming an echo chamber, still being open to a cosmopolitan view of the occult in general, but nationalized styles of magic, or you could call it folkish or tribal interchangeably, it depends on what group you're looking at, what magical system perhaps, I think is also a good thing as well. Keeping that pure lineage of occultism. If you want to appropriate something, appropriate it. If you want to study other systems outside of your cultural core, you should do so. That's a good thing. That's academic in nature as well as spiritual. But there should also be purity within each of these separate lineages, literally to maintain the diversity, oddly enough, of the occult. Because otherwise what you get is sort of the older pure systems are denigrated, they're ripped apart, and then you get homogeneity, and that's rather boring. I see this occasionally happen. I won't name names, but I've read some modern grimoires, some modern tracts, and oftentimes what you get is something professing to be like, oh, this is the authentic, ultimate voodoo ritual system, and it's totally westernized. It has nothing to do with actual hoodoo or anything like that. Or you read some text that mixes together Vedic lore, mainstream Vedic views, with westernized chaos magic at the same time that it drags in a bunch of figures from the westernized sort of Renaissance Solomonic cycle or something like that. And it's just this weird combination, and it doesn't really work in many cases. It can be very well written, in some cases more than others. Sometimes it's very interesting. I suppose you could use it as a system. But a lot of people encountering that may not even really be aware of where these systems come from. If they're not studying the history of these literary traditions, because if you're going back before relative modernity, you're looking at books as far as this lore goes. You're not, you go back half a century, and it's all literary. It's all books and inscriptions and things like that. It isn't until the last half century that you get people talking about these things on radio or television to any great extent. Even a half century ago, it was considered very spooky, rather taboo to even address the occult. Even on the internet, a decade ago, it was a taboo subject in most circles. People were still much more religious even a decade ago than they are now. They were much less receptive to ideas like neo-paganism, Satanism, Wicca, any of these other occult forms that exist. It was still considered part of that spooky-dooky-o satanic panic stuff. Now it's more accepted. Now it can be spoken of more in the open. I've been doing it. I started doing it back when it was still relatively unpopular to do so, and I can continue doing it because I've established myself to speak of such things. I did that on purpose. It's something I'm interested in. It's something where there was a vacuum of opinion on some of these subjects. Now all of a sudden, the last couple of years, you have a bunch of people talking about the occult when some of us did it very early. But I would say this. There's room for any opinion within the occult. There's room for any analysis, any system. You can adopt what you wish to practice. But at the same time, there needs to be some purity of folk traditions, even if it's only in the studious academic sense. Some herbal system from a specific time and place. Some ritual system locked in a specific time and place should not be denigrated in that central form. It can be derived from. Make sure you attribute it properly and understand where that tradition actually was originally from, I suppose. Cosmopolitan magic is a very good thing. It's advantageous. It helps people to study cross-culture. But homogeneous magic is the sort of Trump black candle ritual stuff, or orange candle ritual that we saw spoken of a few weeks ago. Oh, we're going to mass hex Donald Trump with an orange candle. We're going to take down his presidency. It's homogenized magic. You're dragging in multiple traditions there. None of the people practicing it probably even know what those traditions are. I doubt many of them have cracked open an authentic, like a Solomonic text or the Petit Albert or anything like that. I doubt many of them have read anything beyond maybe a couple of Wiccan basic hand guides and maybe the Book of the Law or something like that. I doubt any of them have read any serious alchemical texts, period texts from more than a couple centuries ago. They probably couldn't even read them. And so that's the kind of crap that you get. It's not really magic. It's just this weird fusion that often takes on a political meaning. Now, political meaning within magic isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I've pointed out, the Grand Grimoire, it has some lines in it that clearly are a swipe at monarchy, that clearly are in favor of sort of the representative style of government that was rising in sentiment among the academia of the time, the elitists, the aristocrats, so to speak. That's true. There's nothing wrong with that. It was basically political activism thrown into an otherwise possibly meant literally style of grimoire, although it's not entirely sure that it was meant to be taken literally except by the peasantry, which would have done so. And thus, by watching them, by observing the peasants using these rituals, that the academics that wrote it knew didn't work, they could see who was reading their book, essentially. And they could get together with those peasants and say, oh, yeah, you're probably this kind of person that I can trust, because obviously you're not a big fan of organized religion, and you're probably not a big fan of monarchy. Here, come to our secret meeting, here's my card, essentially. You can get that stuff. But some of this modern homogenized crap doesn't have any real activism. Beyond maybe the environmental. If we're looking at the Wiccan side, we get sort of the Mother Earth, the be kind to animals stuff, the hedge Wicca. That's fine, by the way. I have no problem with that. In fact, I feel it's quite a positive thing in this world. Sometimes not. Sometimes it gets a little creepy, but mostly it's a good thing. But it's not really making an academic political commentary. And in many cases, it's not really based on any specific tradition. It's not even based purely on multiple traditions that have been pulled together. It's sort of a misunderstanding more than anything else of some of this stuff that's gone on throughout time. So I'd say that nationalistic magic is a good thing. And using magic in defense of nationalism, in a mimetic sense, is wide scale at this point on the internet. And there's nothing inauthentic or wrong about that. It's probably more authentic than most newer style magical movements that we've seen over the last decade at least. Mimetics, in the generally understood occult sense that it's being used currently, employed as a propaganda tool, is more authentically occult in nature than most of these other systems. In fact, systems that are, in some cases, far older than the very term meme. That's about all. Peace out.